They booked the family cruise. 4 cabins. My grandkids' names on the manifest. Mine was not. At 6 in the morning, my son's wife texted me a photo. My own boat. Loaded with coolers. 4 words under it. Real family only, Dad. I did not call anyone. I did not raise my voice. I drank my coffee. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I made one phone call. Not to my son. Not to her. To a man 2 slips down. He'd been asking about that boat for a year. By the time they packed their swimsuits, the boat was already gone. I built it with my own hands. And the woman who wrote Real Family Only was about to learn exactly what that meant. But before the coffee went cold, there was a harbour. A boat named after my wife. 38 years of knowing exactly what holds weight and what doesn't. My name's Harold Beckett. I am 71 years old. I did not raise my voice that morning. I never do. A man who spends his whole life listening for the sound of something failing does not need volume. He needs quiet, so he can hear it coming. I built boats for a living. I fixed the ones other men broke. 38 years on the docks of Beaufort, North Carolina, keeping shrimp boats running, keeping Coast Guard cutters afloat. Somewhere in those years, I got good enough that people started paying real money just to hear the truth about their engines. I never went looking for wealth. It found me the way barnacles find a hull. Slow. Then all at once. My wife's name was Carol Jean. She's been gone 3 years now. A stroke took her on a Tuesday morning. She was watering the tomatoes on the back porch. I have not planted a tomato since. I don't trust myself not to cry over a vegetable. We built a boat together. Not bought. Built. 4 winters in my own shop. Steel frame, cedar strip hull. 38 feet of blue and white. I sanded it by hand. I didn't trust anyone else's hands on it. Carol Jean picked the paint. A deep harbour blue, the colour of the water past the inlet on a clear morning. I named the boat after her. Seemed like the only fair trade for 38 years, of putting up with a man who smelled like diesel more often than not. She died before we ever took that boat past the Bahamas. That was the plan. Retire, run it south, sit somewhere warm and let the engine idle instead of me. I kept the boat anyway. I kept everything anyway. My son, Danny, married a woman named Brianne 6 years ago. Brianne Tolliver, before she took our name. Pretty, sharp-tongued. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and rearrange the furniture with her opinions before she took her coat off. I liked her fine at first. Carol Jean never fully did. Near the end, when she couldn't say much anymore, she squeezed my hand once. Brianne had just left the hospital room. "Watch that one, Harold," she said. That was the last full sentence my wife ever said to me. I have thought about it every day since. Danny is a good boy? Was a good boy. Soft, maybe. The kind of soft that comes from being loved too easily. Never having to fix anything with his hands. He works in insurance now. Does fine. But he never learned to read a room. After he married into the Tolliver family, he stopped needing to. Brianne read rooms for him. Brianne read everything for him. I found out later that Brianne's father, Dale Tolliver, ran a charter boat business 2 towns over. It was bleeding money fast, like a cracked manifold. I didn't know that yet, that morning with the coffee. I only knew my phone buzzed at 6 a.m. A photograph of my own boat, the Carol Jean. 38 feet of hull I built with these 2 hands, tied up at Pivers Point Marina. Coolers stacked on the aft deck. My grandkids' pool floats already inflated and lashed to the rail. Danny's family, Brianne's parents, her sister and her sister's husband, all of them boarding my boat. The text called it the annual Beckett family cruise. News to me. I was the one who usually planned it. Paid the fuel, checked the bilge pump myself the night before so nobody's kids drowned on my watch. Under the photo, 4 words. Real family only, Dad. I want you to understand something about me before I go any further. I do not get loud, I never have. My father was a shouter. I watched what shouting did to a house. How it made everyone quieter, smaller, more afraid. I promised myself young I'd never be a man whose family flinched when he walked in a room. So when I read those 4 words, I did not throw the phone. I did not call my son screaming. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished my coffee. I looked out the kitchen window at the marsh grass moving in the wind. I let the anger sit there, in my chest, cold and precise. The way you let a weld cool before you test it. Here's the thing about steel, and about people. You don't know what it can hold until you put weight on it slowly, and watch exactly where it gives. I picked the phone back up. Not to answer Brianne, I scrolled to a different name. Wendell Pike, retired shrimper. Kept his own boat 2 slips down from mine at Pivers Point, going on 15 years now. For the last 12 months, every time he walked past the Carol Jean, he'd stop, run his hand along her rail, say the same thing. Harold, the day you're ready to let her go, you call me first. I hadn't been ready until 6 that morning. 4 words on my phone screen. I became ready in about the time it takes coffee to go from hot to lukewarm. I called Wendell. He picked up on the second ring, the way a man does when he's been half hoping for a call like this for a year. Wendell, I said, you still want the Carol Jean? There was a pause. His voice came back careful, like he thought he'd misheard. You serious, Harold? I'm serious. Meet me at the Marina office in an hour. Bring your checkbook, or don't. We'll work out the terms. But I want her out of that slip by Thursday. Thursday, he said. That's fast. I've got a reason, I told him. Left it there. Wendell Pike doesn't need a reason spelled out. He spent 40 years reading weather off the colour of the water. He can read a man's voice the same way. Before I left the house, I did one more thing. I drove down to the Marina alone, let myself onto the boat while the morning fog was still sitting low on Gallant's channel. Went into the little console cabin where I keep the charts and the radio. Taped inside, behind a panel I built to sit flush, there's a waterproof sleeve. Carol Jean put a card in there herself, the week before she died, when she still had the strength to write in that careful cursive of hers. I hadn't opened it in 3 years. I didn't open it that morning either. I just touched it, the way you touch a headstone, to remind yourself something is still there. Then I went to see a man named Rendell Cobb. Cobb had been my attorney for 12 years, ever since a supplier tried to stiff me on a marine engine contract. I decided I was done handling things on a handshake alone. He was Coast Guard before he was a lawyer, warrant officer for 20 years. He still keeps his office 2 blocks off Front Street. Decorated like the inside of a wheelhouse. Brass fittings. A ship's clock that chimes on the half hour. Cobb is the only man besides Carol Jean who ever told me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. Harold, he said when I sat down across from him, you look like a man who already made a decision, and just wants me to tell him it's legal. Something like that, I said. I told him about the text, about the photograph, about the coolers on my boat, about my grandkids' floats lashed to a rail I'd sanded by hand, about the 4 words that ended with Dad like it was an insult instead of a name. Cobb didn't say much while I talked. He never does. He just made a note now and then. The way a man notes weather changes, he's already half expecting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. You remember what we set up 2 years ago? He said. It wasn't a question. I remember. You want me to explain it to Brianne, or do you want to? I thought about that harbour blue paint, about my wife's handwriting behind a panel on a boat. Legally, as of 2 years ago, it wasn't even fully mine to sell out from under, or for anyone else to sell out from under me either. Let's let the Marina explain it first, I said. Then you can finish the job. Cobb almost smiled. Almost. There's something else, he said. He slid a folder across the desk, the kind of folder a man keeps for a day he hopes never comes, but prepares for anyway. You asked me last spring to look into the Tolliver family's finances, given some things Danny mentioned in passing. I finished that review a month ago. You want to see it now or after Thursday? I looked at that folder for a long moment. 38 years of reading engines taught me one thing above everything else. When something looks fine on the surface, but the numbers don't add up, you don't wait for it to fail on its own. You go looking for the crack before it finds you first. Now, I said. I want to see it now. Cobb opened the folder, turned it around so I could read it myself. Dale Tolliver, Brianne's father, ran a charter fishing operation out of Moorhead City, Tolliver Sport Fishing. 2 boats, 6 employees, 22 years in business. On paper it looks steady. Underneath, Cobb had found a home equity loan against Dale's own house. $140,000, taken out 14 months ago, to cover a bad season and a lawsuit. A client had broken an ankle on a slick deck. The loan had a balloon payment structure. $60,000 due in 10 weeks. 10 weeks, I said. 10 weeks, Cobb said. And Danny co-signed on it. You knew that. I didn't. My own son had put his name on $140,000 of his father-in-law's debt. Never mentioned it to me once. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at the 4th of July cookout, where Brianne's whole family showed up and ate my ribs and drank my beer. Not once. There's more, Cobb said. He turned the page. 3 months ago, a marine broker out of Wilmington named Grady Sutton got a call, asking for a private valuation on a 38-foot custom cruiser docked at Pivers Point. No name on the request. Just a description that matches your boat down to the hull number. My hands went still on the desk. Somebody had my boat appraised, I said. Without asking me. Somebody had it appraised, Cobb agreed. The valuation came back at $210,000, given the custom build. And the condition. That's $150,000 more than the balloon payment Dale Tolliver owes. I sat with that number for a while. $210,000. 4 winters of my life. Carol Jean's hand on every coat of blue paint. Priced out on a piece of paper by a man I'd never met. For a family that had never once asked me if I'd sell. They were going to sell my boat, I said. To bail out her father. That's my read, Cobb said. The cruise gives them the boat, the family, and the photos for the listing. All in one weekend. And it keeps you off the water while Sutton walks it for a buyer he already has lined up. I'd bet money the listing goes live the day after the cruise ends. I thought about the coffee going cold on my counter that morning. About the 4 words under that photograph. Real family only, Dad. Not because they didn't want an old man crowding the deck chairs. Because they needed the deck chairs empty of me. Long enough to sell the whole boat out from under me and call it a family trip. I'm not angry that they need money, I told Cobb. Meant it. Dale Tolliver's boat's going under isn't my doing. It isn't my sin to fix. What I'm angry about is my own son. He let his wife use my boat. And my grandkids. As bait. To move me out of my own life. Cobb nodded slowly. So what do you want to do? I already called Wendell Pike, I said. He wants the boat. Real offer, no games. He's kept his own boat 2 slips down from mine for 15 years. Everybody at that marina knows him and trusts him. I want the sale done by Thursday. Clean, on paper. At a fair price. Not $210,000. I don't need every dollar Grady Sutton thinks she's worth. I need her gone from that slip before anyone else's hands touch her. And the trust, Cobb said. Finish it, I said. All the way. I want it airtight by the time they get back from that cruise. Whatever's left of it. 2 years before that morning, after Carol Jean died, I'd started watching Brianne circle certain conversations at family dinners. A little too carefully. Comments about how at some point you'll want to simplify things, Harold. Comments about just in case something happens. I went to Cobb and set up a marine and property trust. The boat, the waterfront lot my house sits on. A small commercial building downtown I'd bought years back, rented out to a hardware store. All of it went into a trust. Cobb as trustee. Me as the sole beneficiary during my lifetime. It wasn't hidden. It just wasn't advertised. Nobody in my family had ever asked to see the paperwork. Nobody in my family had ever thought to ask whether an old man who fixes engines for a living might also know how to read a contract. That's the thing people get wrong about men like me. They think because your hands are rough, your head must be soft. They think 71 means slow. I've been reading blueprints and engine schematics since before Brianne Tolliver was born. There's no clause in any document that scares me the way a bad weld scares me. At least a weld tells you the truth when it fails. I left Cobb's office, drove back toward the marina, took the long way along Front Street, past the shops that hadn't changed much since Carol Jean and I first moved to Beaufort 40 years ago. The town still smelled the way it always had, salt and diesel. Somebody's fryer running 2 blocks over. I stopped at the little bakery on the corner, the one Carol Jean used to walk to every Saturday morning. I bought a cup of coffee I didn't need, just to stand outside where she used to stand. I thought about the card taped inside the console. I still hadn't opened it. 3 years, and I still hadn't opened it. As long as it stayed sealed, some part of me could believe she still had something left to say to me. Something I hadn't heard yet. My phone buzzed again while I stood there. Danny this time, not Brianne. Hey Dad, you good? Brianne said you seemed quiet on the phone earlier. I hadn't talked to Brianne on the phone at all that day. I stared at that text for a long moment, turning it over the way you'd turn over a part that doesn't quite fit the housing it's supposed to sit in. I didn't talk to Brianne today, I typed back. Just her text this morning about the cruise. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, Oh, sorry, Dad, my bad. We'll see you when we're back Sunday. Miss you. Miss you. From a son who was, at that very hour, 3 hours from boarding my boat, with his wife's whole family, having left his own father off the guest list, of a trip his father had paid for every single year since the boat was built. I didn't answer right away. I finished the coffee, standing outside the bakery, where Carol Jean used to stand. Let myself feel the whole shape of it. Not rage, something quieter and older than rage. The specific grief of watching a boy you raise get slowly rewired by people who never once had to earn what he was handing them. Wendell met me at the marina office an hour later, checkbook in his shirt pocket, like he'd carried it there the whole drive over. Dockmaster Louise Ferris pulled the paperwork. We sat at the little folding table in the office, smell of coffee and fish bait hanging in the air. We did the whole thing clean and simple. $165,000. Fair for a custom build with an owner willing to move fast. Wendell didn't blink once at the number. He'd been saving for this boat, in his head, for a year. You sure about this, Harold? He asked, pen hovering over the last line. More sure than I've been about anything in a while, I said. He signed. I signed. Louise notarized it and stamped it. Just like that, the Carol Jean belonged to a man who had loved her from 2 slips away for 15 years, who would keep loving her the right way, without ever once thinking to sell her out from under the man who built her. When do you want her moved? Wendell asked. Thursday morning, I said, before anybody gets back. He nodded slow, the way a man nods when he understands more than he's saying. I walked back to my truck past the empty slip where the boat had sat that morning, coolers and pool floats and all. I thought about a marine broker out of Wilmington. He was about to find out the boat he'd valued at $210,000 for somebody else's family emergency belonged, as of an hour ago, to a retired shrimper who wasn't selling to anybody. I still hadn't opened the card. But for the first time in 3 years, I thought I finally understood what it might say. Thursday came in grey and calm, the kind of morning where the harbour sits so flat you could set a level on it. I stood on the dock at 6 a.m, watched 2 men from Wendell's crew ease the Carol Jean out of her slip, slow and careful, the way you move something you respect. Wendell stood at the wheel himself, hand light on the throttle. As she passed me, he lifted 2 fingers off the wheel. A small salute. I lifted mine back. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. I felt the particular ache of watching something you built with your own hands sail off under somebody else's flag. Even a good man's flag. Even the right decision. 40 years of marriage and 4 winters of sanding cedar strips by hand don't disappear just because you make the smart move. They just get quieter. I went home, sat at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee. For the first time in 3 years, I let myself think hard about what Carol Jean had written on that card. I still hadn't taken it out from behind the panel. It felt wrong to read it alone in my kitchen, without the boat under my feet. Some things need to be read where they were written. Danny called around noon, his voice bright with the particular fake ease of a man who's practiced a phone call in his head before making it. Hey, Dad, we're having a great time out here. Kids caught 2 Spanish mackerel this morning. Good, I said, glad they're having fun. Yeah. Hey, listen, I know the invite thing was, it probably came out wrong. Brienne meant it more like a couples trip this year. Give the grandkids some cousin time with her side too. Nothing personal. I let a silence sit there. The kind of silence I've learned, over 71 years, does more work than any accusation ever could. Dad, you there? I'm here, I said. How's the boat running? There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that tells you a man is choosing his next words carefully, or has been told to. Good, actually, Danny said. Real smooth. Brienne's dad's friend, the marine guy, came by the dock yesterday before we left. Looked her over. Said she's in great shape. Said she'd fetch a real number if we ever wanted to, simplify things for you. There it was, spoken plainly in my own son's voice. The plan I'd already read in Cobb's folder the day before. Simplify things for you. As if selling the boat his mother named, and his father built, would be a kindness done to me. Not $150,000 of daylight robbery aimed at bailing his father-in-law out of a hole he dug himself. Simplify things, I repeated. Yeah, I mean, not right now, obviously. But like down the road, you're not getting any younger, Dad. And a boat like that is a lot of upkeep for one guy. I looked out my kitchen window at the marsh grass, still and green in the noon light. I thought about the fact that I had personally serviced that engine every single spring for 11 years. Replaced the bilge pump myself just 2 months earlier. Checked every hose and clamp the night before that very cruise, so his children wouldn't drown on my watch. And here was my son, telling me the upkeep was getting to be too much for an old man. You let me worry about the upkeep, I said. You have a good trip, Danny. Tell the kids I love them. Will do, Dad. Love you. I hung up, sat there for a long minute, turning the phone over in my hand. He didn't know yet. Neither did Brianne, or her father, or the marine broker who'd probably already started drafting a listing in his head. They were 3 days into a 5-day cruise, on a boat that no longer belonged to any of us, floating around thinking they had time. I called Cobb that afternoon. How's the trust language coming? I asked. Clean, he said. I finalised the last provisions this morning. The property, the building downtown, and now the proceeds from Wendell's purchase. All of it sits inside the trust, protected the way you wanted it. Nobody touches a dollar of it without your signature. And mine. After you, it passes exactly the way you've directed. No probate fight. No ambiguity for anybody to exploit. And if somebody tries to claim I wasn't competent to make these decisions, I said, if somebody gets a notion in their head about guardianship, or power of attorney, or convinces some doctor to sign off on something I never agreed to. Cobb was quiet for a second. Has somebody said something like that to you, Harold? Not yet, I said, but I've been paying attention the last year. Little comments, Brianne mentioning a cousin of hers who's a nurse practitioner, mentioning it a little too often for it to be nothing. Danny asking me twice this spring if I'd been getting my memory checked. Like it was casual, like it wasn't a question with an answer he was hoping for. If that ever surfaces, Cobb said, I want you seeing Dr. Marsh at the county clinic every 6 months, starting now. On the record, clean bill of cognitive health, dated and filed. I want a paper trail nobody can argue with. You give me the word, I'll set the first appointment for next week. Do it, I said. That's the thing nobody outside my generation seems to understand about getting old around people who want something from you. It isn't the aches, or the slower knees, or the reading glasses you now need for fine print. It's watching people you love start quietly building a case against your own mind. One comment at a time, laying groundwork the way a man lays rebar before he pours concrete, so that when the day comes to pour, the whole structure is already there, waiting. And you never even saw the forms go up. I wasn't going to let that concrete set. Not around me. I spent that Thursday afternoon doing something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went out to the shed behind the house, the one Carol Jean used to call my church. I pulled out the old ledger book I'd kept since the day I opened my first shop. Not digital records. The physical book, leather-bound, going back decades. Every job I ever did, written down in my own hand. I found the entry for the day I bought the waterfront lot our house sits on. $18,000, back when nobody wanted waterfront property in Beaufort. The flood insurance scared people off. It's worth close to $400,000 now. I found the entry for the commercial building downtown, $62,000. Bought with money I'd saved from 10 years of engine work. Rented out now for $2,200 a month. To a hardware store that's been there since before Danny was born. I found the entry for 4 winters of materials on the Carol Jean. Cedar strips, steel fittings, marine grade everything. Almost $40,000 in materials alone. Not counting the 1,000 hours of labour I never charged myself for. I added it all up on a legal pad. The way I used to add up parts and labour for a customer, the house and lot, the commercial building, the boat sold now for $165,000. My retirement accounts, built slow and boring over 4 decades, sitting at just over $310,000. My late wife's wedding ring, appraised 2 years ago at $9,000. I would never sell it, but I wrote it down anyway. A man should know the full weight of what he's carrying. Total on paper. Just over $1.18 million. Not because I got lucky, not because I inherited anything, because a man showed up to a shop floor for 38 years and never once believed the work was beneath him. I sat in that shed until the light went orange through the one window. I thought about a text that said real family only, sent by a woman whose own father owed $60,000 in 10 weeks, sent from a boat that was, by the time she hit send, quietly worth more than her entire plan had accounted for. Then I drove down to the marina one more time, let myself onto Wendell's boat with his blessing. Finally, 3 years late, I opened the panel behind the console, took out the waterproof sleeve. I sat down in the same seat I'd sat in 100 times, at the same wheel I no longer owned, and I read my wife's handwriting for the first time in 3 years. The card was smaller than I remembered, a single sheet of cardstock, folded once, her handwriting a little shaky by then, but still hers, still that careful cursive she'd learned in a one-room schoolhouse in Craven County, 60 years before either of us knew the other existed. Harold, if you're reading this, it means somebody tried to take the boat. Or tried to take you off it. I know you. You'll want to fight loud. Don't. You've never needed loud a day in your life. It's not going to start working for you now. Whatever they tell you, the boat stays till you say so. Not till they say so. Not till a lawyer they hired says so. Till you say so. I picked that blue because it was the colour of the water the morning you asked me to marry you. Out past the inlet. I am not done being on that water with you, even from wherever I end up. Take care of our boy. He's soft where you're hard, and that's not his fault. It's just how he was raised. Easier than you were. But don't let softness be an excuse for what people do to him, or what he lets them do to you. Love, Carol Jean. I sat there a long time, long enough that the light through the window went from orange to grey, long enough that Wendell came by once to check on me, saw my face, quietly closed the cabin door again without a word. The way only a man who has also buried someone knows how to do. Take care of our boy. He's soft where you are hard, and that's not his fault. She'd seen it before either of us had a name for it. 3 years before Brianne ever sent a text about a family cruise, my wife had looked at our son, understood exactly what kind of pressure he'd eventually bend under, and exactly whose fault it wouldn't be when he did. I folded the card back along its worn crease, put it in my shirt pocket over my heart, decided it would stay from then on. The cruise ended Sunday afternoon. I know because Danny texted me a photo. The 4 grandkids, sunburned and grinning, standing on a dock that was no longer the Carol Jean slip. Had a great time, Dad. See you soon. I didn't answer that one either. Not out of spite. I was simply done answering questions nobody had actually asked me yet. Monday morning, my phone rang at 7:15. Brianne, I let it ring twice before I answered. The way you let a hot engine sit a beat before you touch the housing. Harold, hi, it's Brianne. Listen, I think there's some kind of mix-up at the marina. We went by this morning to grab some gear we left on the boat, and the slip's empty. Louise said something got, I don't know, sold. That doesn't sound right, does it? Her voice had the specific brightness people use when they are already afraid of the answer, hoping you'll talk them out of it. It's not a mix-up, I said. I sold her Thursday. Dead silence on the line. Long enough I could hear a gull somewhere behind her, the low idle of some other boat's engine. You sold the boat, she said finally, without telling anyone. I don't recall being told about the cruise either, I said. Kept my voice exactly the same volume I used to explain a fuel line to a customer. Real family only, I believe the text said. I figured a boat that only real family gets to use should probably belong to whoever's actually on the deed. Turns out that was me. Harold, that's not... I didn't mean it like... I know exactly how you meant it, I said. I've had a few days to think it through. Wendell Pike bought her. Good man. He'll take better care of her than a broker in Wilmington ever would have. Another silence, longer this time. When Brianne spoke again, her voice had dropped the brightness entirely. Gone, flat and careful. What broker? Grady Sutton, I said. Out of Wilmington. Did a private valuation on my boat about 3 months back. Came in at $210,000. I understand your father's got a balloon payment of $60,000 due in about 9 weeks now. Funny how the numbers line up. I heard her breath catch. Just slightly. The sound of someone realising the floor they'd been standing on was never load-bearing in the first place. Harold, I don't know what you think you know, but... I know what I know, I said, because I hired someone to find out. Same as I imagine somebody hired Grady Sutton. The difference is, I told the truth to the man I hired. And I'm telling the truth to you right now. Your father's in trouble. I'm sorry for that. Genuinely. I don't wish hardship on anybody, but you don't get to solve your father's problem by selling my wife's boat behind my back and calling it a family trip. Danny didn't know anything about the valuation, she said quickly. That was all my dad's idea and Grady's. I swear to you, Danny had nothing to do with it. Danny co-signed $140,000 of your father's debt. And never told me, I said. So I'd say Danny knew plenty. He just didn't know I'd find out before you finished selling my boat. The line went quiet again. I let it sit there. The way I let every silence sit. I've learned the person who can't stand a silence is always the one with something to hide inside it. What do you want? Brianne said finally. For the first time that morning, I heard something under the careful tone. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of it. I need some time to think about how to handle all this, I told her. Before she could ask again, I'll be in touch. I hung up first, which I don't think Brianne expected. In 6 years of knowing her, I don't believe I'd ever once hung up on her before she was ready to let the conversation end. That afternoon, I did something I should have done years earlier. I drove over to the County Register of Deeds, a little brick building 2 blocks off the courthouse square. I asked the clerk, a patient woman named Doris Kellum, who'd stamped my paperwork on more than one property over the decades, to pull the full history on Dale Tolliver's Marina slip lease. The one at the commercial dock in Moorhead City, where he kept the Pamela Sue and his other boat, a smaller centre console called the Carolina Girl. Doris found it in about 10 minutes. What she found surprised even her. Harold, this lease has been in arrears twice this year already, she said, scrolling through the record. Looks like the marina sent 2 notices, one in March, one just last month, threatening to terminate the slip agreement if the balance isn't brought current by the end of next month. I hadn't asked Cobb to look into the slip lease. I'd been so focused on the home equity loan and the balloon payment that I hadn't thought to check whether Dale even had a legal place left to dock the one boat of his that still passed inspection. How far behind is he? I asked. $4,100, Doris said, between the 2 months. I thanked her, drove home with that number sitting in my chest next to all the others. $60,000 due on the balloon payment. Now $4,100 behind on the very dock his remaining boat needed to keep operating at all. A man doesn't get into that kind of hole by accident. He gets into it one bad decision compounding on the last. The way rust doesn't appear all at once on a hull. It starts as one small blister nobody bothers to sand down. By the time you notice it, it's eaten clean through the plate. I called Cobb that evening, told him what Doris had found. That's useful, he said. Not because we're trying to bury the man, Harold. I know that's not your intention. But it tells us how deep this actually goes. And it tells us Brianne likely knew more than she let on this morning. A slip lease notice like that comes to the boat owner's address. And Brianne's been staying at her parents' place 2 weekends a month, helping since the spring. You think she knew, I said. I think it's very hard to help your mother with groceries twice a month and never once see a certified letter sitting on the kitchen counter, Cobb said. But that's speculation, and I don't build cases on speculation. What I do know for certain is what's documented. And what's documented paints a family in a whole a great deal deeper than a single balloon payment. I thought about my grandkids again. The 2 boys and the little girl. None of them older than 11. None of them with the faintest idea their grandfather on their mother's side was juggling debts. The way I used to watch a man juggle 3 engines with parts on back order for all 3, praying nothing failed before the part truck showed up. I don't want to destroy that family, I told Cobb. I want my boat safe. I want my trust protected. And I want my son to wake up. That's all I've ever wanted out of this. Then let's make sure that's exactly what happens, Cobb said. But Harold, I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you plainly. A hole this deep doesn't stay quiet forever. If you don't control how this comes out, somebody else will, and you won't like their timing nearly as much as you'll like your own. He was right. I knew it even as he said it. So I spent the next several days doing what I do best, not reacting, preparing. I met with Cobb twice more that week, reviewed every page of the trust language, line by line, until I understood not just what it said, but exactly how it would hold up if anyone ever tried to argue against it in front of a judge. I had Dr. Marsh's cognitive evaluation filed and notarized, dated and squared away, where no future claim of confusion could ever touch it. I called Wendell once just to check on the Carol Jean. He told me she was running smooth, said he'd already taken her out past the inlet twice, said he thought about Carol Jean's name on the hull every single time he passed that stretch of blue water where I'd once asked her to marry me. And I waited for Danny to call. He didn't. Not for 4 days, which told me almost as much as anything Doris Kellum had found in that deed office. Before Danny called that Saturday, there was one more thing I did. something Cobb didn't know about until after the fact. I drove out to the county courthouse annex, the small building behind the main one, where the fraud and consumer complaint records get filed. I sat down with a clerk named Wendy Sasser, heavy-set woman, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She pulled up the public complaint database on her terminal without a second thought, since none of it was sealed. "You looking for something specific, Mr. Beckett?" she asked. "Tolliver Sport Fishing," I said. "Just checking if anybody's filed anything yet." She typed for a minute, squinting at the screen. "Nothing filed yet. But I'll tell you, there's an inquiry flag on the account. Somebody called in 3 weeks ago, asking about the process for filing a complaint against a charter business. Didn't leave a name. Just asked questions and hung up. 3 weeks ago. Before the cruise. Before the text. Somebody, somewhere, already smelled the same rot I was only just starting to trace. Any way to know who called?" I asked. "Not without a subpoena," Wendy said. "We don't log caller ID on general inquiry lines. Could have been anybody. A disappointed customer. A competitor. Even somebody in the family worried enough to ask what happens if things go wrong." I thanked her and left. Turned that fact over the whole drive home. If somebody outside our family had already started circling Dale Tolliver's business, looking for a way to file a complaint, then the clock on this whole mess was ticking faster than even Cobb's folder had shown. It wasn't just my boat and my trust at stake anymore. It was 11 families' vacation deposits, sitting exposed, waiting for whoever made that first phone call to make a second one, a formal one this time. I called Cobb that evening, before Danny's call ever came. "There's outside interest," I told him. "Somebody already asked the county about filing a complaint against Tolliver Sport Fishing 3 weeks back." Cobb was quiet for a moment. "That changes the timeline a little. If a formal complaint lands before Friday, this stops being a family matter we can handle with dignity. It starts being a public record anybody can pull." "Then Friday needs to happen fast," I said. "And it needs to protect those 11 families too. Not just me." "Agreed," Cobb said. "I'll draft language that requires restitution as a condition. Not just a suggestion. If Dale wants to avoid me referring what I know to the Consumer Protection Office myself, he settles those deposits. On a schedule. In writing. Starting immediately." "Good," I said. "I don't want to be the reason strangers lose their vacation money on top of everything else. This was never about punishing people who had nothing to do with any of it. Here's the truth of it. Plain. Some folks might expect an old man wronged the way I was wronged to want blood, to want every single person connected to it, to suffer as much as I did that morning with the coffee going cold. I never wanted that. I wanted my boat safe, my trust airtight, my son's eyes open, and I wanted the innocent people caught in the blast radius of somebody else's bad decisions to come out whole. A man who spends his life fixing what's broken doesn't switch off that instinct just because the broken thing happens to be his own family. I thought about Carol Jean a great deal that week, more than I had in months. She always had a gentler read on people than I did. She'd have found a way to worry about Dale Tolliver's 11 customers before she ever got around to worrying about her own boat. I think some part of me, doing what I did that week, protecting those families and the paperwork before I ever confronted the ones who'd wronged me, was trying to make her proud, from wherever she'd ended up. Danny's call came 2 days later. Everything after that moved the way I've already told it. Danny finally called on the 5th day, a Saturday evening. I could tell from the first word that something in him had shifted. "Dad, can I come by tomorrow?" "Just me. No Brianne, no kids." "Sunday's fine," I said. "Come around noon, I'll have coffee on." He showed up at 11:45, early for Danny, who's run late to nearly everything since he was 14 years old. He sat at the same kitchen table where I'd sat with the legal pad and the ledger book 2 weeks before. For a long minute he didn't say anything at all, just turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. The way I used to turn a bolt, I wasn't sure I wanted to loosen yet. "I found the slip lease notices," he finally said, "in a drawer at Brianne's parents' place. When I was over there helping Dale sort through some paperwork last week. 2 of them, both addressed to the house, both dated before the cruise. I didn't say anything. Let him get there on his own, the way you let a young mechanic find the actual problem himself instead of just handing him the answer. A fix you find yourself sticks with you longer than one somebody else hands you." "Brianne knew," he said. "She had to have known. She was over there helping with the mail twice a month, Dad." There's no way she didn't see those notices sitting right there on the counter. Probably not, I said, gently as I could manage. And she let me co-sign that loan without telling me her dad was already behind on the marina lease too. She let me put my name on $140,000 without telling me the whole picture. His voice cracked slightly on the number, the first real crack I'd heard in him since this whole thing started. I feel like an idiot, Dad. You're not an idiot, I said. You're a man who trusted his wife. And trusted his in-laws. Further than the facts on the ground deserved. That's not the same thing as being stupid. It's the same mistake half the good men I've ever known have made at some point in their lives. The mistake isn't trusting people. The mistake is not checking the weld yourself before you put weight on it. He laughed, short, without much humour in it. Mum used to say things like that, about checking things yourself. Your mother, I said, understood you better than either of us gave her credit for while she was here. I reached into my shirt pocket, took out the card, still folded along its worn crease, set it on the table between us. She wrote this for me the week before she died. I only opened it 2 weeks ago, sitting on the boat after Wendell bought her. Danny read it slowly, his eyes moving over her handwriting the way mine had. When he got to the line about him being soft where I was hard, and it not being his fault, he had to set the card down, press the heel of his hand against his eyes. For a moment, before he could keep going. She saw this coming, he said, when he could talk again. 3 years ago, before any of it happened. She saw a lot of things coming, I said. She usually didn't say anything until it mattered. That was her way. Mine's a little louder, in my own quiet way. I don't wait for the crack to show up on the surface. I go looking for it early. In the metal you can't see yet. Danny picked the card back up. Read it once more. Then looked at me with something in his face I hadn't seen since he was maybe 19 years old. Home from his first semester of college. Asking me for advice about a girl who wasn't Brianne and never became anyone I ever had to worry about. What do I do, Dad? That's not a question I can answer for you, I said. But I can tell you what I'm doing. You can decide if you want to walk the same road. Friday I'm meeting with Cobb. I'm asking Brianne and her parents to be there too. I'm going to lay out what I know, plainly, without shouting, the way I've handled every hard conversation in my life. And I'm going to protect what I built for the rest of my life and for after it. And in a way nobody can ever quietly chip away at again. Am I going to lose everything? Danny asked. Quiet. No, I said. You're going to lose the version of this family where your wife's problems automatically become my problems without anybody asking me first. That's not losing everything, Danny. That's finally having a floor under your feet that somebody actually checked before you stood on it. He nodded slowly. For the rest of that Sunday afternoon, we didn't talk about the boat, or the loan, or Brianne, or any of it. We just sat on my porch, the way we used to when he was a boy. Watched the heron work the shallows the way it always had. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my son felt like my son again, instead of somebody else's messenger. Before he left, he stopped at the door. Dad, whatever happens Friday, I'm not on their side. I want you to know that going in. I know, son, I said. I've always known. That's exactly why I'm not walking away from you. Even now. Friday morning came in clear and cool, the kind of light that makes Front Street look like a postcard. I put on the one good jacket I own, dark blue, the same one I wore to Carol Jean's funeral. Some days call for a man to look like he means business without having to say it. I got to Cobb's office 15 minutes early. He had the conference room ready. The ship's clock on the wall reading 10:15, a stack of folders squared up at the head of the table, like a man laying out tools before a job he's already planned start to finish in his head. You good? He asked. I'm good, I said. I slept fine. That surprised him a little, I think. It surprised me too, if I'm honest. 3 years of sleeping poorly since Carol Jean died. And the night before, what I knew would be the hardest conversation I'd had with my family in 3 decades, I slept 8 hours straight through, the card from the boat sitting on my nightstand, where I'd have to see it first thing. Danny arrived first, alone, 10 minutes early, looking steadier than he had the Sunday before. He hugged me at the door. This time it didn't feel stiff. It felt like a hug from a man who'd already decided which side of the room he was standing on. You ready? He asked. I've been ready my whole life, I said. I was just waiting for the right morning. Brianne came in next. Sharp grey suit. The kind of outfit a person wears when they've decided the best defence is looking like they have nothing to defend. Behind her came Dale Tolliver, a heavy-set man in his 60s, sunburned neck. The particular exhausted look of somebody who's spent a long week doing math that keeps coming out wrong. His wife Pam trailed in last. Quiet. Eyes down. The kind of quiet that told me she already suspected more than anyone had told her. Cobb waited until everyone sat, then closed the conference room door. "Thank you all for coming," he said, in the same even tone I imagine he used commanding a Coast Guard cutter 30 years ago. "Harold asked me to walk through some paperwork today. I think it's best if he starts, since this concerns him most directly." I set my hands flat on the table, the way I do before I explain a repair to a customer who's about to hear a bigger number than they wanted. 2 weeks ago, I said, Brianne texted me a photo of my own boat, loaded up for a family cruise, told me it was real family only. I want to start by saying that hurt, not because I need to be included in every trip my kids take, because that boat has my late wife's name on it. I built it with these two hands, and I have never once, in 6 years, treated Brianne like anything less than my own daughter. Brianne's mouth opened, then closed again. I found out afterward, I went on, that a marine broker named Grady Sutton did a private valuation on that boat 3 months ago. $210,000. I found out that Dale here has a balloon payment of $60,000 due on a home equity loan in 9 weeks. A loan my own son co-signed without telling me. I found out the cruise put the whole family on that boat for photos, kept me off it. Was set up to end with a listing going live the moment everyone got home. "That's not Harold, I can explain," Dale started. But I held up one hand. Not sharp, just steady. He stopped. "You don't need to explain the money trouble to me, Dale," I said. "I've been broke before. Anybody who's run a small business as long as you have knows a bad season can turn a good plan into a bad year fast. What I need explained is why nobody came to me directly. I've helped this family before when they've asked. All anybody had to do was ask." The room was quiet. Pam Tolliver was crying. Quiet tears, dabbing at her eyes with a folded tissue she must have brought already, knowing this conversation was coming. "There's something else," Cobb said, sliding a folder to the centre of the table. Given the co-signature arrangement between Danny and Mr. Tolliver, and given the direct financial motive behind the attempted sale of a boat, that, unbeknownst to anyone in this room except Harold and myself, has been held in a protected trust for the last 2 years, I felt it was necessary to conduct a broader review of Tolliver Sport Fishing's financial standing. Dale's face went the colour of old rope. "You had no right," he started. "I had every right," Cobb said, calm as still water. "Your daughter attempted to facilitate the sale of an asset that belongs to my client's trust, using my client's own grandchildren as part of the staging for that sale. That review turned up something concerning. I think everyone in this room deserves to hear it, especially your wife." He opened the folder. "Tolliver Sport Fishing has accepted deposits on 11 separate charter bookings for next summer, totaling $14,200, all of which has already been spent on current operating costs. One of your 2 boats, the Pamela Sue, failed a Coast Guard safety inspection 2 weeks ago, remains impounded at a repair facility in Morehead City, meaning you currently have no vessel capable of fulfilling half of those bookings, even if the money was still available, which it is not. And the slip lease on your remaining boat, the Carolina Girl, is currently $4,100 in arrears, with a termination notice on file at the County Register of Deeds, dated before the family cruise ever took place." Pam Tolliver's tissue stopped moving. She looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time in 22 years of marriage. "Dale," she said very quietly, "is that true? Were there notices at the house? I never saw anything." Dale didn't answer at first. Brianne shifted in her chair. I watched her carefully, the way I'd watch a gauge about to tell me something that the operator didn't want to admit. "Brianne," Pam said, turning to her daughter now, voice sharpening. "You helped with the mail every visit. Did you see those notices?" The silence that followed told the whole room everything Cobb's folder hadn't already said out loud. "I saw one," Brianne finally admitted, barely above a whisper. "In March. I didn't think it was that serious. Dad said he had it handled." "I did not have it handled," Dale said. Quiet now too. All the fight gone out of his voice. I never had any of it handled. I just kept hoping the next season would fix what the last one broke. I looked around that table, a family quietly coming apart at the seams under its own weight. I felt something I hadn't expected walking in that morning. Not satisfaction, something closer to sadness. The particular sadness of watching a structure fail that could have been shored up years earlier. If anybody involved had been willing to say the true number out loud before the roof started sagging. I'm not here to ruin anybody, I said, into the silence that followed. I'm not filing a complaint against you, Dale. I'm not going to. What people do with their own business is their own business until it starts touching mine. But you should know, if this ever surfaces on its own, if one of those 11 families ever calls the state to ask where their deposit went, that's not a family matter anymore. That's a fraud inquiry. And no amount of family cruise photos is going to fix that. I looked at Brianne then, for the first time since I'd known her, 6 years of holidays and cookouts and her sharp opinions rearranging every room she walked into. I saw something in her face that looked almost like fear. And underneath the fear, something that looked almost like shame. I know why you did it, I said to her, kept my voice at the exact same level it had been the whole conversation. You were trying to save your father. I understand that instinct. I'd have done the same for my own father. God rest him. If I'd had the money and the nerve to try it your way. But you tried to save him with something that wasn't yours to spend. And you used my grandchildren. And my son as cover while you did it. That's the part I can't let go quietly. So what happens now, Brianne said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I looked at Cobb. He nodded once, opened the second folder. Now, he said, we finish what we started. Cobb let the silence sit a moment longer, the way he does when he wants a room to feel the full weight of a fact, before he adds another one on top of it. Then he reached into the same folder, slid out a single sheet, separate from the rest. There's one more thing I found while reviewing the Marina Slip records, he said. I think everyone at this table deserves to hear it, especially you, Danny. Danny straightened in his chair. What is it? The private valuation Grady Sutton conducted on the Carol Jean 3 months ago, Cobb said. I pulled his engagement letter, which is a matter of public record once a marine survey is filed with the county for insurance purposes. The client of record on that engagement letter isn't Dale Tolliver. The room went very still. It's you, Danny, Cobb said. Your name, your signature. Dated 11 weeks ago. Danny's face went the colour of the tablecloth. That's not... I never signed anything with a marine broker. I've never even met the man. I'd like to see that letter, I said. Cobb passed it across the table. I looked at the signature line. It was Danny's name, printed in his own hand. But the signature above it wasn't his. I'd watched my son sign his name 1,000 times. On birthday cards, school permission slips, the loan papers for his first truck. I knew his hand the way I know the sound of my own engine. This wasn't it. That's not your signature, son, I said, sliding the page toward him. Danny stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. Something in his face had gone from pale to something harder. Something I hadn't seen in years. Brianne, he said, you signed my name. Brianne's composure, cracking slowly for the better part of an hour, finally gave way entirely. Danny, I swear it wasn't. I only did it because you were travelling for work that week, and Grady needed a signature fast. I thought you'd have said yes anyway. You always say yes to helping my family, so I just... You forged my name, Danny said. Quiet. Quiet from Danny had always meant something serious, the same way quiet meant something serious from me, on a legal document. Illegal. Authorising a valuation on my father's boat. Without asking me. I was trying to help my dad, Brianne said. Tears coming now. Real ones. I didn't think it would matter. I thought we'd just get the number and figure out the rest later. I never thought Harold would actually sell it before we even got the chance to talk to him properly. You didn't give him the chance to talk to you properly, I said. Kept my voice level, even as something cold settled deeper in my chest. You gave him a text at 6 a.m. telling him he wasn't real family. Then you tried to sell what he built, using a forged signature from his own son. There's no version of that story where you were simply trying to help. Cobb cleared his throat. I should note for the record that forging a signature on a marine survey engagement letter particularly one connected to an attempted sale of trust-protected property, is not merely a family matter. Depending on how Mr. Sutton's firm chooses to respond once they learn the signature was fraudulent, this could expose Brianne to legal liability well beyond anything discussed here today. "Are you going to report her?" Danny asked me, his voice tight. I thought about that question for a long moment, longer than anyone in that room probably expected. I thought about Carol Jean's card in my shirt pocket, about "take care of our boy," about 6 years of holidays and cookouts and a woman who had, until that morning, always struck me as sharp but not cruel. "No," I said finally. "I'm not going to report her, not because what she did was small. It wasn't. But because I've spent my whole life fixing things instead of tearing them down. I'd rather she spend the next several years proving she's learned something than spend any of them in a courtroom over a boat that's already sold and already safe. That's my choice to make, since it's my name that got forged onto that letter, one way or another, but I want to be very clear about something, Brianne. I want everyone at this table to hear it plainly." I leaned forward slightly. "If anything like this ever happens again, to me, to my trust, to anything with my name or my son's name on it, I will not extend the same grace twice. This is the only free pass either of you will ever get from me. Use whatever's left of my trust in your marriage to make sure there's never a reason for a second one." The room was silent except for Pam Tolliver's quiet crying and the low tick of the ship's clock on the wall, now reading 20 past 10. Danny sat very still for a moment, looking at his wife. I watched something pass over his face that I recognised. I'd felt it myself once, decades earlier. The exact moment you realise the person beside you has been making decisions on your behalf that you never agreed to, and might never have agreed to if you'd been given the chance. "I need some air," he said, stood up, walked out of the conference room without looking at Brianne again. I let him go. Some things a man has to walk through alone before he can walk back in and finish the conversation. Cobb waited a beat, then looked at me. "You still want me to proceed with the succession update?" "More than I did an hour ago," I said. He nodded, reached for the second folder, the one that hadn't been opened yet, the one that held the trust language itself. "Then let's finish this properly," he said. "Once Danny's ready to come back in." Danny returned about 5 minutes later, eyes red but steady, sat back down beside me instead of across from Brianne. Which I noticed, and which I think everyone else in that room noticed too. "I'm ready," he said. "Go ahead, Cobb." Cobb gave the room a moment to settle, both hands flat on the closed second folder. I used that pause to look around the table, the way I'd look around a shop floor before deciding which job to tackle first. Pam Tolliver had stopped crying mostly, sitting with the stillness of a woman doing arithmetic. She didn't want to finish. Dale wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Brianne had her hands folded so tight in her lap, her knuckles had gone pale. Danny sat beside me now, instead of across from her, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. That told me more about where his heart had landed than any words could have. "Before we go to the trust language," Cobb said, "I want to walk through the timeline once more. Plainly. So there's no confusion later about what happened, and in what order. Because I suspect at some point, somebody in this room is going to want to tell a different version of this story to someone who wasn't here today." He opened a small notebook, the same kind he always carried, read from it without any drama in his voice. The way a man reads a maintenance log. 14 months ago, Dale Tolliver takes out a home equity loan of $140,000 against his own house, co-signed by Danny Beckett, to cover a bad season and a slip-and-fall lawsuit settlement. 11 weeks ago, Grady Sutton, a marine broker in Wilmington, is engaged to privately value the vessel Carol Jean, using a signature purporting to be Danny's, which Danny has just confirmed under oath. In this room, he did not provide. 4 weeks ago, Tolliver Sport Fishing accepts deposits on 11 separate charter bookings for next summer, spending the proceeds on current operating costs rather than holding them in reserve. 2 weeks ago, the Pamela Sue fails a Coast Guard inspection. The same week, a slip lease termination notice arrives at the Tolliver residence over an unpaid balance of $4,100. And that same week, Brianne Beckett organises a family cruise aboard the Carol Jean, explicitly excluding Harold. Time to conclude with a listing going live the following Monday. He closed the notebook. "That is not one bad decision compounding into a hard season," Cobb said. That is a pattern, built over more than a year, with Harold's boat as the final piece, meant to make the rest of it disappear quietly. I say this not to condemn anyone permanently, but because I think it's important for everyone at this table to understand exactly how close this came to working, and exactly why it didn't. It didn't work, I said, because I've spent 38 years learning to notice the exact moment something starts sounding a little too convenient. A cruise, timed just right. The one weekend I'd be conveniently off the boat, while a broker walked it for a family who needed the money in 10 weeks. I've heard smoother excuses from men trying to sell me a bad transmission. I wasn't about to fall for one from my own family. Danny let out a breath that was almost a laugh, though nothing about his face looked amused. You knew that fast. From one text. I didn't know the whole shape of it that fast, I admitted. I knew enough to make one phone call to Wendell before the coffee even went cold. The rest, Cobb and I built out over the 2 weeks since, piece by piece. The way you trace a wiring fault back through a whole boat until you find the one corroded connection causing every other light to flicker. Dale finally looked up. So what happens to us now? Truly. Not the version where you're being polite about it. I looked at him for a long moment, a man who'd spent 22 years running boats out of Moorhead City, who I'd nodded to at church suppers, shared a beer with at more than 1/4 of July, sitting across from me now, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Truly, I said, I think you have 11 families who deserve their deposits back, or their trips honoured, whichever you can manage first. I think you need to walk into that marina office and settle your slip lease, before you lose the one boat you have left that still passes inspection. None of that is my problem to fix, Dale, and I want to be plain about that too. I'm not writing you a cheque. I already told you, I don't wish hardship on anybody. But wishing you well and bailing you out are two very different things. Only one of them is mine to offer. And Brienne? Pam asked. Quiet, looking at her daughter now with an expression I couldn't quite read. What happens to her? I turned to Cobb. Let's finish the trust language now. I think everyone's heard enough of the history to understand exactly why it matters. Cobb opened the second folder at last, the ship's clock behind him, ticking past 10:40. The room went still, the way a room goes still right before a verdict. Before I read the updated terms, Cobb said, I want to note for the record that Harold has held these decisions in draft form for the better part of 2 weeks, revising them twice as new information came to light. Most recently 3 days ago, when the slip lease arrears surfaced. This is not a reaction made in anger this morning. This is a plan built carefully, the same way Harold builds everything. He looked at me. You want to add anything before I read it? I thought for a moment, looked around that conference room one more time, at Brienne with her knuckles gone pale, at Dale unable to meet anyone's eyes, at Pam, quietly grieving a marriage she was only now seeing clearly, at my own son, sitting close beside me instead of across the table. Just one thing, I said. I built everything I have with these 2 hands, starting with nothing, in a town that didn't owe me anything and never promised me a thing. I did it because Carol Jean believed in me before I had a single reason for anyone to. And because I got up every morning for 38 years and did the work, whether I felt like it or not. Nobody in this room, and I mean that gently, not as an insult, has ever had to build something from that kind of nothing. That doesn't make any of you bad people. It just means you don't yet know what it costs to watch it get treated like it doesn't matter. Nobody spoke. Even Dale, who I think had expected me to come in swinging insults the way he might have in my position, seemed to understand, for the first time that morning, that I wasn't interested in winning an argument. I was interested in making sure nothing like this ever happened again. Go ahead, Cobb, I said. Cobb closed the first folder, set his hand flat on top of the second one. Not opening it yet, the way a good surgeon lets a room settle before the next incision. The ship's clock ticked past 10:45. Somewhere out on Front Street, a delivery truck idled at the curb, its engine a low rumble under the silence in the room. Before we go further, he said, I think it's worth pausing. What comes next affects everyone at this table differently. I want each of you to understand exactly what you're hearing before I read it. Dale looked up, wary. What else is there? There's the matter of the boat's ownership history, Cobb said, which I think Harold should walk through himself, since it goes back further than most of you realise. I nodded, took a breath. This was the part I'd been turning over in my mind since the morning I read that 4-word text. The part that would take everything we'd covered so far, the loan, the deposits, the forged signature, and set it inside a frame none of them had known existed. 2 years ago, I said, not long after Carol Jean passed, I started noticing something. Little comments here and there, mostly from you, Brianne, though I don't think you ever meant them the way they landed on me. Comments about how at some point I'd want to simplify things, about how a big property like mine, a boat like mine was a lot for one man alone to manage, about a cousin of yours, a nurse practitioner, who could take a look at me sometime, just to be safe. Brianne's face went still. I didn't say anything at the time, I went on. I just listened, the way I've listened my whole life to a room before I decide what's actually being said underneath the words. And what I heard, underneath all of it, was a family quietly building a case that I was slowing down, getting confused, needing to be managed. So I went to Cobb. We built something that made that case impossible to ever use against me, long before any of this, the loan, the cruise, the forged signature, ever entered the picture. You're saying you saw this coming 2 years ago, Danny said. Quiet. More to himself than to anyone else in the room. Before any of this. Before the loan, before the cruise, before any of it. I saw the shape of it, I said. I didn't know it would be a boat, or a cruise, or your father-in-law's business, Danny. I just knew that somewhere down the road, somebody was going to try to convince me, or convince a judge, that I couldn't be trusted to run my own life anymore. I've spent 38 years reading the early signs of failure before the failure shows up. I wasn't going to stop just because the thing that might fail was my own family, instead of an engine block. Cobb closed his notebook, set it aside. For a moment, nobody in the conference room moved, the way a shop floor goes still right after a machine finally stops making the sound that had been bothering everyone for days. I want to say one more thing before we get to the paperwork, I said. Found myself looking mostly at Danny now, because whatever came next mattered more for him than for anyone else at that table. Your mother used to tell me that the measure of a man isn't how he acts when things are easy, it's how he acts the one time in his life when he's got real leverage over somebody who wronged him and has to decide what kind of man he wants to be while he's holding it. Danny nodded slowly, not trusting his voice yet. I've got leverage in this room today, I said. More of it than anybody sitting here probably expected, going in. I could use every bit of it to burn this whole arrangement to the ground. Out of spite. Spite would feel good for about a week. But that's not the man Carol Jean married. It's not the man I intend to still be when I'm 90. Looking back on how I handled the last hard thing that happened to me, Brianne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, careful not to smear whatever makeup was left holding on. So here's what I'm not doing, I said. I'm not calling the state on Dale's business. Though I'd be well within my rights to, I'm not telling Grady Sutton his engagement letter was built on a forged signature, though that's a call Cobb could make with one phone call if I asked him to. I'm not cutting my grandchildren out of a single thing that's coming to them. What I am doing is making absolutely certain that nobody in this room, or married into it later, ever gets to treat what I built with my own 2 hands like it's a communal fund waiting to be tapped the next time somebody's finances go sideways. Cobb opened the second folder a little wider now, spreading 2 pages side by side. The low hum of the delivery truck outside had finally faded, leaving just the tick of the ship's clock and the sound of Pam Tolliver's breathing. Shallow and quick, the way a person breathes when they can feel a hard thing coming and have no way left to stop it. Harold, Cobb said, would you like me to read the updated succession language in full, or summarise it first? Read it in full, I said. Everybody in this room earned the right to hear every word of it, one way or another. I want to explain, before Cobb reads a word of it, exactly why I decided to write it the way I did. I could have simply cut Danny out, let the trust pass entirely to the museum programme, clean and simple. No half measures. Part of me, the part still raw from a 6 a.m. text that called me not real family, wanted exactly that. But Carol Jean spent 38 years teaching me the difference between justice and cruelty. I've come to believe justice leaves a door open somewhere, even a narrow one, while cruelty nails every door shut just to prove a point. My son made mistakes, I said, looking around the table one more time, trusting the wrong people with information he should have protected, letting his wife's family's troubles become invisible weight on his own shoulders, without ever asking me for help carrying it. Those are real mistakes. I'm not pretending they aren't. But he didn't forge anything. He didn't plan a cruise designed to get me off my own boat. He didn't spend 11 families' deposits on operating costs he couldn't cover. Those belong to other people in this room. I intend for the paperwork to reflect exactly that difference. Danny's jaw was tight, working the way it used to when he was a teenager, trying not to cry in front of his friends. And Brienne, I went on, turning to her directly for the first time in several minutes. You're getting more grace today than I suspect you expected walking in here. Not because what you did was small. It wasn't. Because I still remember the day Danny brought you home to meet us. How nervous you were. How hard you tried. And because somewhere under 6 years of bad decisions, there's still the woman who tried that hard once. I'm hoping you can find her again. For your children's sake, if nothing else. She nodded, unable to speak, tears running freely now, no longer bothering with her makeup. Cobb waited until the room had settled fully, until even the ship's clock behind him seemed to tick a little quieter. Then he squared the pages in front of him, one final time. Given everything Harold has just said, Cobb told the room, I'll read the finalised language now, exactly as it will be filed with the county this afternoon. So there is no ambiguity for anyone at this table about what happens from this day forward. Cobb squared the pages in front of him, cleared his throat once, began. His voice taking on the same measured cadence he must have used decades earlier, reading orders aloud on the deck of a cutter. A cadence built for a room that needed to hear something exactly once and understand it completely. Effective this date, he read, the Beckett Family Marine and Property Trust, established by Harold James Beckett, is hereby amended as follows. Danny straightened in his chair. Brienne had gone very still, hands no longer folded, but pressed flat against the table, as if bracing for something physical. Section 1 remains unchanged, Cobb continued. Daniel Harold Beckett remains the sole successor beneficiary of the trust upon the passing of Harold James Beckett, to receive full title to all trust assets, including real property, commercial holdings, financial accounts, and proceeds from any prior sale of trust-held vessels. I watched something ease just slightly in Danny's shoulders. Section 2 is added as follows, Cobb said. Any attempt by the successor beneficiary, by his spouse, or by any party acting on behalf of either, to sell, transfer, mortgage, encumber, appraise for sale, or otherwise dispose of any trust asset without the express written consent of the grantor, during the grantor's lifetime, shall constitute an irrevocable forfeiture of the successor beneficiary's interest in this trust in its entirety. He paused there, letting the room absorb it, the way you let a talk wrench click once before you check the reading. Upon such forfeiture, he went on, all trust assets shall pass instead to the Beaufort Maritime Museum's Youth Apprenticeship Programme, to be used in perpetuity for the training of young tradespeople in marine mechanics, carpentry, and related maritime skills, in the name of Harold and Carol Jean Beckett. Pam Tolliver made a small sound, not quite a sob, more like the sound a rope makes right before it finally gives. Section 3, Cobb said. This provision applies retroactively to any actions taken in the 90 days preceding this amendment, meaning the engagement of a marine appraiser under a forged signature and the organisation of a family excursion designed to facilitate an unauthorised valuation or sale of trust property are hereby recognised as triggering events under Section 2, and are formally noted as such in the Trust's permanent record, though the grantor has elected, at his sole discretion, not to enforce forfeiture on the basis of these specific events, choosing instead to treat them as a first and final warning. The room let out a breath all at once, like a held note finally resolving. Danny looked at me, eyes wet, understanding arriving on his face the way understanding arrives on a young mechanic's face, the moment he finally sees the fault he'd been hunting for an hour. You're giving me a second chance. On the record. In writing. I'm giving the both of you a second chance, I said, looking briefly at Brienne, then back to my son. One. Just the one. Everything after this moment is on you, and on her, and on whatever the two of you decide your marriage is actually going to stand for going forward. Brienne opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Harold, I am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything right now, but I am sorry. I panicked about my dad and I did something wrong. And I used your grandkids to do it. And I know that's the part that can't be undone with an apology. I looked at her for a long moment. 6 years of holidays. 6 years of a woman who never once, not one single time, asked me a genuine question about my late wife. About the boat's name. About why a man builds something with his own hands instead of just buying it off a lot. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Meant it, even through everything. I'm not looking to make an enemy of you, Brienne. You're the mother of my grandchildren, and that matters to me more than any boat ever will. But trust isn't rebuilt with an apology in a conference room. It's rebuilt slow. The way everything worth having gets built. You want back into good standing with me, you're going to have to show me, not tell me. Over a long stretch of time, the same way I showed this whole town who I was. One job at a time. For 38 years. Cobb added the number for the room's benefit. Plain and unhurried. For the sake of full clarity, the trust's total value, as of this morning, stands at approximately $1.19 million. Combining the property, the commercial building, the proceeds from the boat's sale, and Harold's retirement accounts. Exclusive of his late wife's wedding ring, which is not, and will never be, a trust asset available for sale. Dale let out a low breath. I had no idea it was that much. Most people didn't, I said. That was rather the point of never talking about it at family dinners. Dale Tolliver stood up abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. This is a family ambush. You brought us in here to humiliate us. Nobody humiliated you, Dale, Cobb said. Calm as ever. You did that yourself 14 months ago, when you took out a loan you couldn't service and decided the fastest fix was your daughter's father-in-law's boat, instead of an honest conversation. I'd sit back down if I were you. There's still the matter of those 11 deposits, and how you intend to make those families whole before one of them calls the Attorney General's office, instead of calling me. Dale sat back down, slower this time. All the anger drained out of him. Something closer to defeat sitting in its place. I stood up instead, buttoned my jacket, looked around the table one last time. I'm not angry anymore, I said. Found, saying it, that it was true. I was angry the morning I got that text. I'm not angry now. I'm just done. Done holding up a roof over people who spend more time figuring out how to take from under it than thanking me for building it in the first place. From here forward, everybody in this family gets exactly what they've earned. No more, no less. Same as it's always been on any job site I've ever run. I walked to the door, then stopped. Turned back once more. Danny, I said, you're welcome at my house any time, alone or with the kids. That door's never locked to you. But if you come as my son, not as somebody's messenger. He nodded, eyes wet, didn't trust himself to speak. I left the conference room, walked out past Cobb's brass fittings and the ship's clock, now reading 11:15. Stepped out onto Front Street into a clear, cool morning, the kind Carol Jean always loved best. I breathed it in like a man who had just set down something heavy he'd been carrying a very long time. There's one more thing I never told Danny directly, though I suspect he's worked it out on his own by now. The morning after that Friday meeting, I drove down to the marina before sunup, the way I do most mornings. I found Louise Ferris already at her desk in the dockmaster's office, coffee steaming, radio playing low. Heard it went about as well as it could have gone, she said, not looking up from her paperwork. Word travels fast on a small dock. About as well as it could have gone, I agreed. You know, she said, setting her pen down, I've watched a lot of families come through this marina over the years. Good boats, good families, bad ones. You'd be surprised how many good boats end up in the hands of bad families, and how many good families never get the boat they actually deserve. Which one am I? I asked her, half joking. You're the rare one, Louise said. Good boat, good family. And just enough sense to keep the two of them from ruining each other before it was too late. I thought about that the whole walk back to my truck. Just enough sense. Not more than enough. Not some kind of genius maneuver nobody else could have pulled off. Just a man who paid attention, kept his paperwork straight, refused to let anger make his decisions for him. That's the whole secret, if there is one. Not much of a secret at all. Any man can do it. Most men just don't bother until it's already too late to matter. I still think about that 6A, Emma texts more than I probably should, A year and some months out from it now. Real family only, Dad. 4 words meant to cut me down to nothing. Meant to remind me my place was somewhere outside the boat I'd built with my own hands. Instead, those 4 words did the opposite of what Brianne intended. They made me look harder at what real family actually meant. Once I started looking, I found it in places I hadn't expected. In a retired shrimper who'd waited a year to ask for something he wanted. In a 17-year-old boy with no blood claim on any of it. In a son who finally, slowly, remembered how to stand on his own 2 feet instead of somebody else's. Real family, it turns out, was never about who got a seat on that boat. It never is. The weeks after that Friday morning moved slower than I expected. The way weather moves slower after a storm than it did leading up to one. All the violence spent, just the cleanup left. Dale Tolliver did, in the end, refund every one of the 11 charter deposits, though it took him most of 2 months. Cost him the Carolina Girl, which he sold to a fishing outfit in Wilmington to raise the cash. He kept the Marina Slip current after that, month to month, running the Pamela Sue alone once it cleared inspection. A smaller operation than he'd ever wanted to run, but an honest one. I respected that more than I let on the one time I saw him again, at a hardware store on Front Street, both of us reaching for the same box of stainless fittings. "Harold," he said, nodding. "Careful. The way you nod at a man you're not sure has forgiven you yet." "Dale," I said back. "Let him have the fittings. A small kindness costs a man like me nothing. Sometimes it means more to the person receiving it than anything with a dollar figure attached." Grady Sutton's firm, once Cobb quietly informed them the engagement letter carried a forged signature, terminated their relationship with Dale Tolliver entirely, flagged the file for their own internal compliance review. Nothing ever came of it beyond that. No charges, no lawsuit. I hadn't wanted any. I only wanted the fraudulent paper pulled out of circulation before it could cause anyone else a problem down the road. Brianne surprised me. I'll admit that plainly, because I don't think either of us expected it the morning Cobb read that trust language aloud. She started showing up, unannounced but always welcome. Some Sunday afternoons with the kids, she started asking me questions she'd never asked in 6 years. About the boat, about Carol Jean, about what it actually took physically to sand a cedar strip hull by hand across 4 winters. The first time she asked, I think she expected a shorter answer. I gave her the long one. An hour of it, standing in my shop with sawdust still on the floor from a rocking chair I was building for my granddaughter's birthday. She listened the whole time without checking her phone once. "I never really asked you about any of this," she said, when I finished. "About who you actually were before you were just Danny's dad." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. Most people don't. Until they need something from the man they never bothered to ask about." She flinched at that. But she didn't argue. That told me she'd finally started hearing the things I said the way I meant them, instead of the way she wanted to hear them. Danny and Brianne went to counselling. I only found out about it secondhand, through my granddaughter mentioning it at a Sunday dinner, the way children mention things adults think they're too young to notice. I didn't ask either of them about it directly. Some rebuilding needs privacy to actually take hold, the way a weld needs time to cool before you can trust it to hold weight. A father hovering over every stage of that process does more harm than good. I did ask Danny once a few months later whether he still felt like somebody's messenger. "No," he said. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed him completely. "I feel like your son again." It took almost losing everything to remember what that actually meant. "It usually does," I told him. "Most men don't learn the weight of a thing until somebody finally sets it down in front of them and says, 'Here, you carry this now, and see how it feels.' I spent a good part of that fall doing the thing I do best, working with my hands, finishing that rocking chair for my granddaughter, teaching my grandson how to properly tighten a hose clamp without stripping the threads. Small, unglamorous lessons. I hoped they might land somewhere in him the way my own father's lessons, however imperfect the man delivering them, had landed in me. I also did something I hadn't planned on. The week after that Friday meeting, something that surprised even me. I called the Beaufort Maritime Museum's director, a soft-spoken woman named Councilwoman Estelle Ruiz, who also sat on the town council and had championed the youth apprenticeship program since its founding. I asked her what it would take to fund a scholarship. Not the whole trust, just a piece of it. $25,000, set aside now. while I was alive to see it used. For one young person, a year to apprentice under a working tradesperson in Beaufort, boat building, engine repair, carpentry, whatever trade the kid showed an honest hand for. "That's remarkably generous, Mr. Beckett," she said. "May I ask what prompted it?" "A boat," I told her, "and a text message. And a lot of thinking about what it actually means to build something worth protecting. I'd rather put money toward a kid who wants to learn a trade with their hands than let it sit waiting for people who think building things is beneath them." The first scholarship went, that following spring, to a 17-year-old named Marcus Van, a quiet kid from the east side of town who'd been hanging around Wendell Pike's slip for 2 summers straight, asking questions nobody else bothered to ask. The same way I once hung around an old mechanic's shop as a boy, until the owner finally got tired of shooing me off and put a wrench in my hand instead. Wendell took him on himself, taught him engine work on the very boat that used to carry my wife's name. Now carried a fresh coat of the same harbour blue Carol Jean had chosen decades before Marcus Van was born. I went down to the marina the day Marcus passed his first solo engine diagnostic. A bilge pump replacement Wendell had rigged to fail on purpose, just to see if the boy could find it without help. He found it in 11 minutes, faster than I had, the first time somebody tested me the same way. Back when I was younger than Marcus, and had exactly nothing to my name but a willingness to get my hands dirty. Not bad, I told him. He beamed like I'd handed him $100, which, in a way I understood better than most people ever could. I had. Wendell still keeps the Carol Jean in beautiful shape. He renamed nothing. I never asked him to. He never offered to change it. I think we both understood, without ever saying it directly, that some names are meant to outlast the hands that first painted them onto a hull. I think about my late wife's card often now, the one that sat behind that console panel for 3 years before I finally found the nerve to read it. Whatever they tell you, the boat stays till you say so. She was right about more than the boat. She was right about the whole shape of what was coming, 3 years before it arrived. She'd spent 40 years watching me the way I spent 38 years watching engines, learning exactly where the stress would eventually show. I don't carry anger about any of it anymore. Dale Tolliver rebuilt his business smaller and more honest than it used to be. Brianne is slowly becoming someone I recognise as worth the trust my son placed in her all those years ago. My son calls me now, without his wife prompting him to. Just to talk. Just because that's what sons do when nobody's engineering the relationship for them anymore. And Marcus Van, 17 years old, grease permanently under his fingernails, a scholarship with my late wife's name on it, comes by my shop most Saturdays now, asking questions the way I once did, learning the same trade that built everything I have and can one honest hour at a time. Wendell Pike stopped by my shop one Saturday that fall, unannounced the way he does most things, found me sanding down a new tiller handle for his own dinghy, of all things. I'd offered to build it for him the same week he bought my boat, and hadn't gotten around to it until the weather cooled. "You didn't have to do this, Harold," he said, running a thumb along the smooth curve of the handle. "I know," I said. "Wanted to." He sat down on the old stool by my workbench, the same stool Carol Jean used to sit on when she'd bring me lunch out to the shed. He watched me work for a while without saying much. One of the things I've always liked best about Wendell Pike, he doesn't fill silence just because it's there. "You ever regret selling her?" he finally asked. "Not the decision. I know why you did it." "I mean the actual boat, watching somebody else run her." I set the sandpaper down. Thought about that honestly, the way I try to think about everything he asks me. Wendell's the kind of man who deserves an honest answer, even when a shorter one would do. "No," I said. "Every time I see her out on the water, harbour blue catching the light, I think about the fact that she's still exactly what Carol Jean and I built her to be. A boat that carries people who love her properly. I just happen not to be the one steering anymore. That's a smaller loss than it sounds like, once you get used to it. Marcus asked me last week if he could name the next boat he ever owns. After somebody, Wendell said. Wanted to know if that was a strange thing to want to do. What did you tell him? Told him it was about the least strange thing a man could do, Wendell said. Told him about you and Carol Jean. The 4 winters, the blue paint. Kid got real quiet after that. I think he understood something in a way he hadn't before. I thought about that for a long moment, sanding the last rough edge off the tiller handle, feeling the wood go smooth under my palm the way I'd felt 1,000 pieces of wood go smooth over 60 years. That's the whole thing, Wendell, I said. That's the entire reason any of this mattered. Not the money. Not even the boat itself, if I'm honest. It's that a 17-year-old kid with grease under his fingernails now understands something. That building a thing with your own hands and naming it after somebody you love is worth protecting with everything you've got. If that's the only thing that comes out of this whole mess, it was worth every bit of the trouble. Wendell nodded slowly, turned the tiller handle over in his hands one more time before setting it down. Carol Jean would have liked that answer, he said. She'd have liked you asking the question, I told him. She always did trust a man who asked more than he told. He laughed at that, the real kind. We sat together a while longer in the quiet of my shop, two old men who'd spent their whole lives with their hands in engines and wood and rope, watching the light change through the one window the way it always had, the way it probably always will, long after either of us is around to watch it. There's a particular evening I still think about more than any other. Almost a year to the day after Brianne's text landed on my phone at 6 a.m. Danny brought the grandkids by unannounced. A warm Saturday in early June. The marsh grass gold in the low light. The way it gets right before summer fully takes hold. Brianne came too, hanging back a little near the porch steps, the way a person stands when they're still not entirely sure of their welcome, but has decided to risk it anyway. We were driving by, Danny said, which we both knew wasn't true, since nothing about my street is on the way to anywhere else in Beaufort. Thought we'd stop in. Glad you did, I said. Meant it. Pulled 2 more chairs out onto the porch. The kids ran straight for the shop, the way they always do now, drawn to the smell of sawdust and the promise of scraps to build something with. I heard my grandson ask Marcus Van, who'd stopped by that afternoon too, whether he could help sand the new tiller I was building for Wendell's dinghy. Marcus, 17 and patient in a way few boys his age manage, crouched down. Showed him how to hold the sandpaper flat so he wouldn't gouge the wood. The same lesson an old mechanic had once shown me on a Saturday morning, 60 years earlier. Brianne sat down beside me on the porch steps, careful, like she was still testing whether the boards would hold her weight. I drove past Pivers Point last week, she said. Saw the Carol Jean out on the water. Wendell had some kids with him, teaching them something. I couldn't tell what. Marcus and 2 others from the apprenticeship program, I said. Wendell takes them out most weekends now, weather permitting. She was quiet for a moment, watching the marsh grass move. I used to think a boat like that was just, I don't know, a rich old man's toy, something to sell when it stopped making sense to keep around. I didn't understand it was basically a diary. Every plank of it means something to you. It took you a text message and a lawsuit-shaped scare to figure that out, I said. Gently, the way you'd needle somebody you'd already forgiven. Most people never figure it out at all. I think about that morning a lot, she said. The text. I keep trying to explain to myself why I thought that was okay to send. I still don't have a good answer. I was scared for my dad, scared people would see how bad things had gotten for my family. Somehow I turned all of that fear into something cruel, aimed at the one person who'd never once been anything but kind to me. Fear does that, I said. Turns a decent person mean if they let it drive long enough without checking the gauges. I've seen it happen to better men than either of us. Do you forgive me? She asked. Quiet, not looking at me, watching the kids instead. I thought about that question honestly, the way I think about any question worth answering carefully instead of quickly. I forgave you the day you started asking me real questions instead of telling me what I needed, I said. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Brianne. It's more like a hull. You don't trust it all at once. You test it, plank by plank, season after season. Eventually, if it holds, you stop checking every single seam, every single morning. We're a few seasons in. Ask me again next year. She laughed. A real laugh. The first one I think I'd ever actually heard from her that didn't have an edge of performance underneath it. That's fair. That's more than fair, actually. Danny came and sat on my other side. For a while, none of us said anything. Just watched our grandchildren and Marcus Van working sandpaper into a piece of cedar in the fading gold light. The sound of it soft and steady. The same sound I'd been making with my own hands for 50 years. You ever regret it? Danny asked eventually. Selling the boat that fast. Not giving us a chance to explain first. I considered the question the way I consider any hard weld, looking for the exact place it might have gone wrong. No, I said. I regret that it had to happen at all, that a family I love got far enough down a bad road that a boat sail was the only thing loud enough to make everybody stop and look at the map. But the sail itself? No. Sometimes the fastest way to save something is to move it out of harm's reach before anybody realises what's actually happening. I learned that with engines a long time before I ever learned it with people. Mom would have liked how you handled it, Danny said. The whole thing. Not just the boat. The way you never raised your voice once through any of it. Your mother taught me most of what I know about handling things without raising my voice, I said. I just finally had cause to use every lesson at once. We sat there until the sun dropped fully behind the tree line, the marsh going from gold to grey to a deep, settled blue. The same colour, I realised, watching it, as the paint Carol Jean had chosen for a boat neither of us knew, back then, would end up carrying our whole family's hardest lesson inside its hull. I never threw a punch in my whole life, never raised a hand to anyone, never raised my voice past a level you'd use to explain a wiring diagram. The only weapons I've ever needed were patience, a clear head, and the plain truth, set down on a table where everyone could see it whether they wanted to or not. People confuse quiet for weak. They confuse an old man's calm for an old man's confusion. I've spent 71 years proving, one job, one weld, one calm phone call at a time, that the two things have never once been the same. The boat still sits in her slip most evenings, harbour blue catching the last of the light. A young man's hands learning her engine the way mine once did. Somewhere behind a panel I built, to be flush enough nobody would notice unless they were looking, there's an empty sleeve now, the card long since moved to a place closer to my heart. Some promises, once you've finally heard them all the way through, you don't need to keep tucked away in the dark anymore. You just carry them, quietly, the rest of the way home. People ask me sometimes, mostly younger men around town who've heard some version of the story, second hand. Whether I ever worry it'll happen again, whether some new pressure, some new debt, some new crisis in the family will send somebody looking at what I've built the same hungry way Brienne once did. I tell them the truth. Of course I worry about it. A man doesn't build something worth having and stop caring whether somebody tries to take it. But worry and fear aren't the same animal. I learnt the difference the hard way, watching my own father worry himself into anger and my own wife worry herself into quiet, careful preparation instead. I chose her way. I built the trust before I ever needed it. The same way I always checked a bilge pump before a storm was even forecast. Not because I expected the worst every single day, because a man who waits for the crisis to prepare for the crisis has already lost half the fight before it starts. The scholarship program has grown some since Marcus Van's first year. Estelle Ruiz tells me 2 more families have reached out, asking how their own kids might apply. I've started setting aside a little more each year. Not from the trust itself, but from ongoing income. Small engine jobs I still take on now and then, because retirement, real full retirement, never quite suited a man who spent his whole life needing something to fix with his hands. Dale Tolliver and I nod to each other now at the hardware store, sometimes talk a few minutes about weather or fuel prices. Nothing deep, nothing that pretends the last year didn't happen. But something civil, something that lets both of us keep living in the same small town, without either of us crossing the street to avoid the other. I think that's about the right size for what's left between us. Not friendship, not enmity either. Just 2 men who made their choices and are living with the weight of them. Pam Tolliver sends me a card every year now, around the anniversary of Carol Jean's passing. Just a line or 2. Thinking of you today, Harold. I've come to appreciate that small, steady kindness more than I ever expected to, from a woman I barely knew before all this started. Grief recognises grief, I've found, even across a family line that spent one hard year at war with itself. As for me, I still wake early, same as I have my whole life. Coffee first. Then out to the shop before the day gets too warm. Some mornings Marcus is already there waiting. Other mornings it's just me and the quiet and the smell of cedar shavings. Either way, I find I don't mind the silence the way I used to, in the first year after Carol Jean died. It doesn't feel empty anymore, it feels earned. I kept the ring on its chain around my neck through all of it, through the text message and the sale and the conference room, and the year of slow rebuilding that followed. I still wear it. I expect I'll wear it until the day they bury me. I've told Danny plainly, no arguments allowed, that when that day comes, it goes in the ground with me and nowhere else. Trust document or no trust document. Some things were never meant to be assets in the first place. Some things were only ever meant to be promises. My name is Harold Beckett. I am 72 years old now, a year older than I was the morning that photograph landed on my phone. Coolers stacked on a boat I'd built with my own hands. 4 words underneath it that were supposed to put me in my place. Real family only, Dad. I think about those words sometimes. Not with anger anymore, just with a kind of quiet clarity. The same clarity I bring to any job that's finally, properly finished. Real family, it turns out, was never about who got a seat on the boat that weekend. It was about who showed up afterward, plank by plank, season by season, to help rebuild what almost came apart. My son showed up. My daughter-in-law, slowly, carefully, is still showing up. A 17-year-old boy with grease under his fingernails, who has no blood claim on any of it, shows up every Saturday morning without fail. That's the whole lesson, if there is one. I've learned enough lessons the hard way over 72 years to trust the ones that finally land soft instead of loud. You don't get to keep the people who only show up when the tide's easy. You keep the ones who stay standing on the dock after the boat's already gone, ready to help you build the next one, plank by plank. With their own 2 hands, the Carol Jean still sails most weekends. Harbour blue against grey water. Young hands learning her engine the way mine once did, carrying a name that was never really about a boat at all. It was always about a promise, kept quietly, the whole way through, exactly the way she asked me to keep it.